Panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another informative Train the Trainer session. I'm Brent Foster with Multifamily Insiders, and we have two great speakers to welcome today. We have Joshua Kelly, who began his career with Lincoln Property Company in 2002 as a leasing consultant in Atlanta, Georgia, and has held numerous positions within the company. For the last 10 years, he has been leading the Midwest Learning and Talent Development Department as their Senior Regional Director. He is on the Legislative Committee for the Chicagoland Apartment Association and is a member of the Association for Talent Development. Mona Vogel has over 20 years of experience in operations, leadership coaching, and training with companies like Southwest Airlines, Fairfield Residential, and is the Director of Training and Development currently for Dayrise Residential. She has conducted over 30,000 hours of training in classrooms and remotely, both here in the U.S. and internationally, and is also a former musician and radio personality, which I'd love to hear more about those things. During this session, we're going to talk about how to train your teams to master mobile. We're going to get your input from a couple of polls, and we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any questions come up, just be sure to put them in that chat questions area for us. And then after the webinar, there'll be a very brief survey. If you could take about 20 seconds to complete that for us, we would really appreciate it. So right now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn it over to Mona.
Thank you, Brent. That was a very nice introduction for Josh and I. And I know that I speak for Josh when I say that we are both very excited to be here to talk about this very relevant and all too important topic in multifamily. So let's not waste any time and let's just get started. Here is a snapshot of what this hour is going to look like. The first thing we're going to talk about is just really some basic concepts of getting to know and getting good at remote learning. Then we're going to go over some tools to help you be successful. And then we're going to finish it off with how you train your teams to master mobile. But first, to give us an idea of where you all are, let's take a quick poll. And I think you guys are probably familiar with their polls and see where you guys fall on the confidence meter. So if you would answer this question, how comfortable are you with remote training? Are you a pro? I'm feeling all right. I need to learn a little more. Or help. So answer the poll question now, and I think Brent's gonna give us some feedback on the answers that come in.
They are coming in. Just about everyone has voted, so we'll give them just a couple more seconds. At certain times, I think I'm a little bit of all of these.
Absolutely.
All right, let's take a look and see what we have here. So it looks like most people are feeling okay about it, with 40% at feeling all right. We got 35% that feel they need to learn a little more. 20% are pros, and 5% have thrown their hands up in the air screaming help.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I can tell you this, no matter where you fall on the scale, and Brent just said it a few minutes ago, I think all of us have fallen into one of these four categories at some point in time or another. So whether you're a pro or you're at that, oh my gosh, please help me, just know that you're not alone. And the fact is, it's because we all get a little stressed out when we're training or learning something new. It's normal because we want to do our best instinctively. And if some of you don't feel quite like a pro yet, and it looks like the majority of you may not feel that pro status yet when training remotely, think about how your teams feel when they're touring remotely. I mean, it's probably a lot like you do. They're a little unsure, maybe they're a little nervous, but ready to gain more confidence and knowledge at the same time, which is why you're here today, is to gain that confidence and that knowledge. And if you've ever trained remotely, you know there are differences than training in a classroom, just like there are differences in-person tours versus virtual tours. So over the course of this webinar, Josh and I are going to talk to you guys about getting into that mindset of complete confidence when you're training remotely, because it's something that is fairly new to most of us, if not all of us. And we want you to be able to take away some tools that are going to help you with that. And then we're going to talk about how to teach your teams the things they'll need to know to be highly effective at virtual leasing. So let's start off with talking about building confidence. The first thing is really just stopping and thinking about what confidence actually is. And I know that sounds sort of like a no-brainer, but in its simplest terms, it's the feeling of self-assurance that comes from your appreciation and knowledge of your abilities and qualities. So how do we build confidence when we're training a new way, or how do we teach our teams to have confidence when they're touring a new way? I mean, think about that. It's actually pretty easy. And all of what we're going to talk about and share with you today apply to both you as a trainer, training a new topic in a new way, and to your teams when they're learning a new process and ultimately doing that new process with technology. The first thing you need to keep in mind is that you need to keep things in perspective. When you're teaching your teams how to use and be effective with mobile devices, think about it this way. What you're teaching them is not new for the most part. It's about how to lease apartments. You know how to do this and you're great at it. In fact, it's the core of what we do in multifamily. The only difference here is the delivery method for you and for them, actually. Now, combine that with the fact that you already know how to use your phone or your tablet. I mean, think about that. You use it every day to video your kids or FaceTime with your family and your friends. You know how to do this. So for those of you who are not feeling quite as confident as you think you should be, there's only one thing causing it, and that's the fear of the unknown. You've never quite done it this way before, or maybe not very often, or you don't have the confidence that you have when you're training in a classroom like you've done thousands of times. It's completely normal to feel this way. And you want to keep this feeling in mind when you're training your teams, because they feel the same way too. They may have never conducted a virtual tour, so they don't feel as confident as they do with an in-person tour. So just remind them, they're still leasing apartments. It's all about perspective. Now, the next thing you can do to build confidence is just prepare for everything, and not just the things that you have control over, which probably is a lot of things. But when you're using technology, you've got a plan for all the things you can't control or that could possibly go wrong. For example, do you have Wi-Fi throughout your whole property for a virtual tour? And if not, how will you compensate for that? Will your leasing consultants be using their own cellular service to conduct the tour? And if so, they have plans that allow for unlimited data. These are just some of the things that you're going to need to iron out. And then once you do, you need to include them in your training. Also, what types of devices are you even going to be using? Does your staff have all the same types of phones, or are they different? My guess is they're different, but let's just say your site has a couple of tablets that everyone uses for touring. Fantastic. But if not, how are you going to familiarize yourself with these devices? One solution might be that you get a guest speaker, or maybe a subject matter expert that's familiar with the different devices. For example, you might have a leasing manager who's just been crushing it at virtual tours and wants to help out with the training. Another thing to consider is whether you're going to modify, and have you modified your training materials to include the actual process of how to use the devices you'll be touring with. And like I just mentioned, not everyone is familiar with all types of devices. I use Apple products all the time. So if you want me to use an Android, you're going to need to include instructions, because you're going to have to show me how. And then last, your training material have flexibility. And what I mean by that is you should always prepare your materials so that they can be modified based on your audience. For example, if your staff is very experienced and unbelievably great at leasing, it might be beneficial just to create a technology module and tie that new information that focuses on the virtual leasing to the concepts that you already have around your leasing material. But if they're somewhat new and could use a refresher, you may want to revamp your current training materials altogether and include the technology piece and then just retrain everyone. Josh and I talked about this when we were building this webinar. We both typically build our training materials with the new hire in mind, and I would encourage you to do the same, assuming they don't know anything about the topic. That way you're always prepared no matter what audience you have or who you're training. The next thing that you need to decide on is the tools and the resources that you're going to use. For example, with remote training, what platform or software are you going to choose? I mean, there are literally tons of them out there now. Zoom, GoToMeeting, Webinar Jam, and since this summer with COVID-19, there are literally thousands available. But whatever you use, the key to being confident is to be very familiar with that technology. Another thing to consider is, you have a designated producer or someone that can help you with the technology side of things while you're training. It's tough to do both. I mean, even as a producer myself, even those of us who have done it a lot, it's just much smoother to have someone that monitors the chat box for you, the questions, muting people. You've all been in those situations where you hear background noise, people having trouble logging in, really any and all tech functions so you can focus specifically on the training. You'll also need to think about really just kind of thinking about how you're going to actually develop the training. Remember, this is being delivered remotely. So is it going to be PowerPoint or video, maybe photographs, or maybe it's just you on a webcam showing how to go through the process? Whatever you choose, you have to consider whether it's going to work well on a webinar. For example, and I know you guys have experienced this, videos that are broadcast through a webinar are very difficult for the end user to see and hear. So what's the alternative? I mean, if you've got a fantastic video that you want to show, how do you get it to the audience? You could send it out as an attachment, for example, after the webinar is over, or maybe you can just put it in the chat box, put a link there so that they can click on it and watch it. You can also buy attachments nowadays that connect to your phone. Display the screen of your device onto your computer. This allows you to show like live steps as you go through them. But whatever you choose, just remember you have to select what works best for you and for your audience. And then finally, what technology will your teams actually use to give a virtual tour? Now, this is something that you're going to have to research if you haven't already. It's not a matter of just video chatting with someone. You have to have some sort of method for doing this. So let's talk about that a little more in detail. What our industry is seeing, and I know you guys are familiar with this, is a growing trend towards three various types of tours. The first is a self-guided tour, and this type of tour really it eliminates the time needed for you to schedule in-person meetings and coordinate with a prospect. It allows them to come in on their own time and just tour the community at their leisure. The second one is the 360 virtual tour that lets prospects tour your community from their desktop or from their mobile device through pre-recorded video. Companies like RealLink, and I think Joshua's company uses RealLink, but RealLink, Matterport, then there's several others. These are just a couple of popular options for 3D virtual tours. The best part is you get to post those videos right to your websites. And then the last is the interactive virtual tour. This is one of the most powerful virtual tours because this is where we get to engage with our prospects and ultimately secure the leads. My company tried quite a few options, but Dayrise decided on a certain one just because of the lack of challenges. We tried things like Google Duo and Microsoft Teams, Facebook Messenger, and YouTube, but we ended up using Zoom because, like I said, it was the easiest for our customers and it had the least amount of challenges. Now, I'm not endorsing them in any way. It's just what works best for my company. And you have to figure out what works best for you. The bottom line is you have to do your research if you haven't already done so. And then the last thing you can do to help yourself feel more confident is what we do with every type of training we do, and that is practice, practice, practice. And this is the one thing that nobody really wants to do, but it is the most important. And this applies to you training remotely and your teams touring virtually. In both cases, you've got to practice. And the first thing you should do is go through your presentation a few times so that you can time yourself. When you're training remotely, and you guys know this, you want to make sure you keep your audience's attention. And that's harder than ever when you're training remotely. It's especially harder than if you do it in person. So the session doesn't, run too long. You got to time yourself and make sure that doesn't happen. Some say that you shouldn't do more than 1 or 2 hours virtually at the very most, but it really depends on the topic and who your audience is. Just keep in mind, this includes any and all activities, polls, breakouts, introductions. Literally everything you're going to include needs to be timed. You're also going to want to have a hands-on training in addition, and this is in addition to the remote class. This gives your teams time that they need to practice as well, because they're going to have to practice. Something like doing several virtual tours with a coworker, for example, would go a long way in helping them feel confident when it's a real prospect. Now, while the brain isn't technically a muscle, it behaves like one in the sense that it can be trained to improve and change. And that means you have to practice your presentation out loud, and your team should practice their virtual tour out loud in excess of 10 times. This is a neurological fact. The brain needs meaningful repetition to lay down long-term memory and strengthen the brain pathways you're going to need when you're actually doing the presentation and you draw from it. But why am I telling you this? Because when you're training remotely or they're touring virtually, when the material that they're going to physically say is really solid in their minds, it frees up space in their brains on the technical side. So the presentation goes much easier, and it comes more naturally. So don't forget, just practice, practice, practice. Now, while you're practicing, do it on your feet and in motion. In other words, if you're showing your teams how to use their mobile devices to tour virtually, especially if this new process is a new process as well, the more you practice actually doing it, the more you develop what's called a body experience. And this is a neurological fact, you guys. Your presentation that your brain, let me rephrase that. It creates the body experience of your presentation, I should say, that your brain's going to remember. It's going to go a long way to making you a pro, because it will eventually just become second nature to you. The thing to remember, though, and it's really important for you to, is to go through the technology and make sure you understand it and practice it. And then the last thing to remember is just, you've got this. You're training a topic that you've been. Big difference is the delivery method. Your job is to show your teams the same thing, that they're doing the same process that they've always done, just using a mobile device rather than doing it in person. Now, yes, there are slight differences in how to sell virtually, and Josh is going to talk about those in just a few minutes. But the bottom line is, if you want to build confidence in your training as well as virtual touring and be a pro, just keep things in perspective, prepare, use the tools that work for you, and practice, practice, practice. Do this, and I know your teams and you will be fantastic at this. Now, I think it's time for another poll. So I'm going to turn it over to Brent to launch that poll.
Everyone, so let's run through this. So where do you feel your team struggle the most with learning remotely? Is it their attention span? Is it the technology? Is it difficult concepts delivered on a small screen? So many people are having a view from their mobile devices. Or is it just the fact that they miss the classroom, the candy and the snacks? So if you would please go ahead and click on there and make your selections. We'll give everybody just a couple more minutes to do that, or a couple more seconds rather. And it looks like the majority of everyone has voted. And overwhelmingly, it's actually, wow, that's huge. So 78% thinks it's their attention span. 17% is the technology, and 6% is the fact that they missed the classroom, the candy, and the snacks.
Yeah, that definitely highlights what Mona was saying about keeping the training short. Absolutely, with the attention span. I know for me personally, it's the candy. I miss my Midnight Milky Way minis. So I'm excited to talk to you about how to better train your team members at how to interact with their guests using technology. As you plan to educate your team members on your new process, there's some key points to get across to them. As we've all noticed, change is the new normal lately, so it's good to practice to ground your team to things that they already know. If you already have training materials related to leasing that you've used for in-person training, link your virtual training session to the concepts that they already know. As Mona mentioned before, the basics of the leasing process are the same. It's just that you're using new technology. So as you're training your team members, remind them of the connection to what they already know, and this will strengthen those neural pathways to the existing knowledge. So when it comes to training customer service, you know your own company's standards. So you'll be teaching your teams how to execute those excellent customer service skills virtually instead of in person. Teach them through examples and build in practice that allows them to say those words. It's one thing for us to deliver the materials, and it's an entirely different story for that individual to practice the skill with the phone in their hand. Make it a part of your learning program to follow up with those team members to measure whether their learning has stuck. Many of your team members' interactions will be virtually, but they're already used to distant connections through the telephone, except now there's an added bonus of being able to see the individual immediately and influence their decision-making process right away. Work on training them unique ways of modifying their existing experiences to make the environment work for them. In this case, we have the video feed at our fingertips, so we get to take advantage of that additional resource. And part of that is listening and watching for verbal and nonverbal cues. On the phone, your teams are used to listening and writing or typing at the same time, but now they need to pay attention to the guest's face, right? So make sure that they know that. Having your head down while you're qualifying your guest on the phone may be fine, but with the video feed, it may feel disconnected or distant to the individual. Train them to listen to the pace and the tone of the guest. Matching and mirroring is the process of connecting to the guest by connecting to their energy. If the caller is bubbly and energetic, tell your team to join in on the fun. But if the guest is thoughtful and methodical, then your team needs a more methodical and thoughtful approach to their process. Teach them to continue to use those useful tools, but also new ones that are available to them. They're going to want to walk through the home, showing the home and focusing on the physical asset, of course, and that's great. But remind them that people lease because they make a connection with the salesperson as well. They'll want to flip that screen around, show their face, make a connection with the person on the other side of the phone or screen. While your community is, the star of the show, teach your teams that they also can be supporting actresses and actors. Here's a quote from award-winning director and producer Brian Grazer. If you're immediately taking this simple step of looking at somebody in the eye, that makes a statement to them, I see you. We're reading people's energy more than what they say. By looking someone in the eyes, it enables great things to happen. I love that quote. Now for some more techie stuff. We talked about creating a personal connection, but actual little connections are important too. Instruct your teams to practice that connectivity across the community when it comes to their mobile device. Data plans for your devices are highly recommended, so you're not relying solely on that Wi-Fi. If you're able to, during the training, have a live demonstration of your chosen software or device. Things like how to set up a tour, how to start it, sending info to the guest, and so forth. If not, at least take screenshots in advance of a live environment so your teams understand how they're expected to use the product. While the leasing process may seem simple, the technology isn't always simple. So prepare yourself for questions that might arise from those green team members. If you use Zoom, breakout rooms are a great tool you can use to have a larger class break out into smaller groups to discuss those topics and practice amongst themselves, and then come back to the main group. Just make sure to keep it brief. You don't want folks out in the breakout rooms during training sessions for 20 minutes or whatever. Keep it very short. Also, a partner producer, like Mona said, for your training session is definitely valuable to help you through those technical aspects of your training. Practicing with the technology is one of the most important pieces of information to convey to your teams. And of course, it's a good tip for your trainers as well. Just like you should always practice your presentation and technology, the same applies for your learners. The more they are able to do those actual run-throughs with you or with their team members and get feedback from them, the more comfortable they will feel with devices and the processes. Remember, they should practice using their actual words and not just fake pretending. You know, okay, well, I'm going to say this here, I'm going to say that there. No, they should actually go through the motions. So ensure that your managers and your other team members in charge of on-the-job feedback know the process and the feedback that you are looking for. That immediate feedback from their peers on site is invaluable as long as it's correct. When your team members are leasing in a virtual environment, they need to be more descriptive and elaborate with their presentations of the community and the home. So teach them not just to show off the thing that's right in front of them, but to use their words to describe it. So that includes telling them how things feel. Right? Normally your agents are leasing in person, the guest is doing all of the opening, the touching, but now your team members have to do that for them. The guest may not think to ask virtually, hey, can you open that pantry for me? When maybe they would have if they were there in person. So train your team to anticipate the needs of the guest based on your team members' experience, your knowledge, the manager's knowledge of the property and their experiences. Guide them to understand how to talk about a particular aspect of the home. So for example, let me turn on this shower here so you can see how great the water pressure is, or showing them where the HVAC registers are and saying, I know you can't feel it through the phone, but there's a nice warm flow of air coming in from this vent. They should spend time in areas of interest to the guest. During the qualifying process, they should have gained some information about their needs, their interests, and so focusing on those things can go a long way to solidifying that connection. If the individual says that they love to cook, spend a little bit more time in the kitchen, demonstrating those areas of use and how they can imagine laying out ingredients and cooking a great meal with their family, but use those descriptors. Another tip you might consider using is having them take something to use as a comparison, such as a measuring tape or something small that people can relate to. So when you're training these concepts, it's okay to encourage your team members to be creative. Something silly like creating a giant cardboard cutout of them so that they can carry it around and show how people could enjoy the home or the community. Obviously, Being adaptable is extremely important when it comes to virtual leasing. So be creative and have some fun with it. They'll learn quickly that individuals frequently talk about your community, your amenities, or the process of leasing and move-in. So teach your teams to be proactive and anticipate what questions they may receive or that they do frequently receive throughout tours or the move-in process. They should use the technology to their advantage to inform the guests in advance or to follow up. So one thing that we do is we create pre-recorded tips. So how to hop on the virtual call, or tips of what it's like to move in and live at the community. So remember, when people start asking questions about the process, it is actually a sign that they're interested in living at the community. So teach your team members to look out for those signs and really latch on to them. One great benefit of a virtual tour is that you can use it to your advantage to overcome objections. So teach your team members to write down their typical objections and brainstorm of multiple ways to overcome them among the team. So then you can find ways to overcome them and demonstrate them over a virtual call, as well as possibly send some links in real time. So let's say you're showing a bedroom and you're not really sure that a king size bed will fit. They've got that objection. So the team member can send them an image of that room with a king size bed fitting into that space. That of course requires some pre-planning from your team. So teach them to make sure that they have those images and those resources at their fingertips. Let's say if the storage for the home is not big enough, why not have some links to local storage facilities and pricing available that they can send right away to that person. Making sure your teams are prepared is the best way to overcome those objections. And finally, as a trainer, you should always evaluate and modify your training materials and processes after that initial testing and implementation. Evaluate your recorded calls so that your team members make sure to follow what you're teaching them. If you find that they're not following a particular practice or procedure, maybe it's necessary to put more emphasis or training on that process that they're missing. If you have team members, make sure that you practice with their peers, their supervisor. The on-site feedback is so important to the group and can help boost understanding and unity with the team and the property. Seek honest feedback from your training sessions and review those results. So some trainers take this for granted, but if you've got somebody who's willing to give you open and honest feedback, take that to heart. And don't be afraid to modify your training and materials as needed. I know they're your baby, but be open to feedback that can help you grow and improve. And don't forget, you got this.
Awesome information. So we're going to open it up right now for a quick Q&A. Actually, only have a couple of questions. So if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and put those in that questions chat area so they'll come over to us. The first question looks like either one of you can answer, but it looks like it may be from Mona based on what the question is, based on building confidence. They said, so many things can go wrong when using technology. I get more anxious when training virtually versus in person. Do you have this problem? And if so, what do you do to help reduce that anxiety before you go virtual?
I'd be happy to answer that question because as a professional speaker, I always have that anxiety and that desire to be the best, but it's that fear of the unknown. You're not sure what's going to happen. And there is not, and I'm just going to be honest with you, there is not a 100% way to eliminate all fear, all anxiety, all everything, because it is technology. And as much as we like to think that technology works all the time, Murphy's Law steps in and bangs you right when you least expect it. The key to it is basically what I talked about earlier, is get you a producer or somebody that can handle the technology side of things while you're training. There is nothing harder than thinking about admitting someone into the webinar, asking someone to mute, helping someone that's having trouble logging in when you see that in the chat box. There's all these different things that can happen and go wrong that are normal. I mean, it's just a part of doing webinars. So get you someone that can do a step into sort of a producer role for you. For example, in this particular case, Josh was the one clicking the PowerPoint and Brent was handling all the technology behind it, and all I was doing was talking. And so it made it really easy for me. The other part of that is, and I cannot stress this to you guys enough, I've studied neurological science for probably the last 7 years in the whole concept of training. And it really, really, really makes a difference if you practice, and I'm telling you, 10 times at the least, I mean, more if you can, out loud on your feet. Because your brain has the ability to sear into its memory, not just the words that you want to say. And you won't always say the exact same words when you're learning your presentation. You'll say them like you would normally say them in a conversation. But it also, and this is the beauty of it, it creates, like I said earlier, that body experience. And I don't know how the brain does it, it just does. And when something goes wrong, your brain takes over. And it's almost as if you just zip right through it. And I'll give you one really quick example if we have time, Brent. I was on stage in front of about 500 people doing a keynote speech. And about 1/3 of the way in, the PowerPoint and everything on stage went blank. And I mean, I wasn't really in the dark because we were in a conference ballroom, but the light shining on me went dark, the PowerPoint went dark, everything went down. And when they finally got it back up, I just kept going. But when they finally got it back up, the PowerPoint didn't work. So I just simply looked over at the man that was in charge of the whole conference, and I said, if you wouldn't mind, would you come up on stage and see if you can get this working again for me? He walked up on stage. It was over on this side of the stage. I walked to the other side of the stage and continued. And I could continue because I had practiced it so many times. And as Josh was talking about earlier, getting feedback, I always get feedback. You know what the #1 thing on my feedback forms was? How impressed they were that I was able to just keep going. Not the content of the stuff that I was presenting, but the fact that in that adversity, I was able to just keep going. And I can tell you the only reason that's true is because I practiced it on my feet, out loud, over 10 times. That will help you. You'll never get 100%, but I promise you, you'll get close to it if you can. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah,
That's
I would
great
also
advice.
recommend preparation, being aware of what could possibly go wrong. Again, you're not going to get 100%, but for example, today they had posted in my building's elevator that Comcast would be working on the internet today and have intermittent outages. And so, of course, that meant in my mind, immediately I thought, what am I going to do to prepare to ensure that I have internet connection? I have a backup that I can connect to if I need to in case something goes out. So being prepared for the things that might happen is so important. So that gives you some peace of mind that you have a plan B.
Excellent point.
More great advice. And, going back to what you said previously about practicing and, standing up and moving around and walking, I pace whenever I'm trying to learn something. I always have. And when I was on site, my teams just thought I was crazy when I was trying to prepare to teach at an apartment association or, speak somewhere. And it really does, make a big difference. It really does make a big difference.
Absolutely.
So another question we have is, how often should you evaluate and modify your virtual training practices?
Josh, you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll take it. I mean, I try to seek feedback from every single training session, whether you ask for it in writing or you have some sort of process for seeking it, electronically, you automate it, or you send them a link to a Google form or SurveyMonkey, whatever you've got to do. I think it's valuable for each and every training session. And you're going to have the folks that just check 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, right, and don't write anything, and that's understandable. But it's if you don't ask, you're not going to get the information. So it's important, I think, to do it for each and every training session. Take a look at those. Every now and then you'll get a little snippet of information. You're like, oh man, I hadn't thought of that, and I'm going to build that into my training session next time. It's also, I think, important to have conversations with the individuals who have been through the training. Sending just a link is a first step, but maybe you kind of pick somebody's brain and you're like, hey, I know you're new to the industry or new to your role. Tell me what you thought about it. And you'll get people who will be like, oh, well, I kind of thought that this could be different, right? And so, don't be afraid to actually ask the questions of the individual from a personal standpoint. Pick up the phone, meet them in person, keep your mask on, of course, but, ask questions. And I think, for every single training class, that's important. And of course, automating that, if you can, is helpful so that it doesn't bog down your administrative time.
I think a good thing to do as well is when you're creating something new, a new topic, is to select a few people that will give you good, honest feedback, that they're not afraid to tell you what they think, and just do a beta class. Just have it out there. Let them just tell you whatever they need to tell you about how it could be better, or which parts are working really well, which parts need to be changed or tweaked a little bit, and then you can really be successful on that first go around. But try a beta test too. That's always helpful for me.
I'll also say that if you're the type of person who likes to make sure things are perfect before they're rolled out, try to get over that. And that's me trying to take my own advice, because I like things to be perfect, but strive for progress over perfection and just get the information out. And the sooner you get it out, the sooner you're going to be able to get that feedback from the team members, and you can improve it even more.
Right.
More great advice. Looks like we have one final question that's in there right now. What is the best way and the best time frame to follow up? I'm assuming they are meaning when you're training your teams.
What are you following up on? Is it whether
I don't know. So
let me address, maybe Josh can think of maybe a couple of others, because there's several things you could follow up on. One is,
hang on one second, Mona. Whoever put this question in, if you'll put a little more specific question in there for us, that'd be great.
So what we try to do, and one of the things that I really like to focus on is the follow-up. And we talk about that with leads all the time, but it's also really important with training as well. And so you want to follow up with your teams, maybe a week or two after they've had the training, to see if they've had any questions, or if there was a part of the process that maybe needs to be addressed a little bit more. This is all a part of the feedback that Josh was talking about. So maybe you send out a feedback form that goes out right after the class, but then maybe there's another one that goes out maybe 2 weeks after, that says, okay, now you've had a chance to do this process for a minute. Tell me what you think about the training now and how we can improve it for future classes. So I would give it, at least a week or two for people to actually do the process, whatever that is. And it may be longer if it's depending on the process, but no more than probably a month. I would stick around that 2-week range, and because people don't know what they don't know. And so they may think your class is great, that it included everything they could possibly need. And then now they start using it and realize, okay, wait a minute, I'm not sure about this. So I would say a couple weeks. That would be my feedback. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, for our process, we use on-site mentors that are partnered with our new team members. And so part of the mentor process is the mentor knows when that individual is going to a class. And so they report back to us in the learning team to say, okay, you know, this person attended the class. I met with them during our mentor meeting the following week or the week after to touch base with them on that, and here was their feedback. So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Right. Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much. It looks like that is all of the questions that we have. We do have another webinar coming up next month, Train the Trainer. It's December 10th, how to manage the rollout of new initiatives at your company. So we hope that you all will join us for that. If you can't make it, if you are registered, you will automatically get a link to view the webinar after that. Same for today. And if any of you guys are looking for any additional training resources for your teams, please feel free to reach out to me. My telephone number and email information is on there. I'd love to kind of help get you pointed in the right direction. Hopefully we can help you out. Also, don't forget about our multifamily trainers roundtable group on Facebook for some more great trainer conversations. And feel free to ask questions on there. Several, trainers have been, posting questions, wanting some tips, tricks, advice on things. So it's, some great conversations going on over there. So don't be shy about that. And we would also love your input on that page as well. So Josh, Mona, it was great having you speak today. We really appreciate it. I actually took a lot from this today. So well, I guess we will wrap it up.
All right.
Thanks, Brent.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Everyone have a great day.
Bye-bye.